Hello and welcome to our next topic called VUCA, which is a term coined by the American forces back at the end of the Cold War, when the world was changing in a way that things became less predictable and pretty uncertain, volatile, complex and ambiguous. That's how the term came about. It was then later on used in management theory and practice to describe situations that are less plannable than before, which is something we're witnessing in our today's world more and more. I think before the pandemic, people are still asking the question of what does VUCA really mean. Today, you don't have to explain the term anymore because everybody knows things have changed big time. But that is nothing really new, because we've seen this over the last 20 years unfold in our industrial world, in our social world, in our social reality. And so we are now faced with an ever-increasing trend of more complexity. And the pandemic is just one big volatile amplitude in there, but it's not over with that. Once the pandemic is over, it's not the end of complexity. We're actually expecting to be there, to be more complexity coming, more disruption, more fast and unpredictable change, and things to be less and less predictable. Now, you could say that's been around all along. It's nothing new, really. And certainly we can say that depending on which country you come from, you've been living in the VUCA world all your life. But we also have managers here in our group, and myself included. I'm coming from a world where definitely I've learned to be planning events, to be moving forward in a more planned and predictable way. And for me, and I think for many, many people who grew up in the developed world, it is a personal change process to come from a plannable, predictable, or more predictable, complicated but not unpredictable world, moving through a complex, unpredictable world into a VUCA world that sometimes even feels chaotic. And if we are looking at today's reality, we're faced with a climate situation, an energy situation, financial world, disruptions in the industrial world. We are faced with a military conflict directly in front of our doorstep. And this is something that is actually on the increase. I have customers in India who have team members in the Ukraine, and they are delivering their processes, products to their customers in Europe and in the US. So the customers have expectations, but it's not so easy to work with the current situation, both practically in logistical terms, but also in an emotional way, because these team members are actually faced with very, very different environmental situations where they are. And so it's quite emotional too. I have customers who develop products in Australia, and they've been trying to ship parts from China to Australia. And it was near impossible for them to ship them. And that was before the lockdown in Shanghai. So we can see the plannability, the predictability, the dependability on the processes that we've seen is not the same that we used to have, knowing that it's coming more complex, more disruptive in the future. We actually need to set our mind into changing our mindsets. Let's say we can't plan everything. We need to develop a more flexible, agile, an open mindset that is more on the experimenting side without giving up, but knowing we can't predict things, right? So here we are. The purpose of this part in our training where I'm talking about VUCA to you is because we are all in this personal change from plannability or more predictability into a VUCA world, disruptive world. I want to help you make the ride a little easier by giving you methods and examples of how you can stay connected with your own self, less fearful, more free from fear, which means not pushing it away, denying it, but really working with it, accepting it as part of today's reality, and take smarter decisions, informed decisions, both individually and together with your teams. So that's the intention. This VUCA world triggers strong emotions of fear and anxiety. Of course, we're all at the same time experiencing happiness and gratitude, feelings of gratefulness and love and connection. But at the same time, with this VUCA world, more and more of these negative feelings, we are faced with them on a very frequent, almost daily basis. This triggers feelings of vulnerability, and also it leads to confusion. So which information is valid, how to interpret it, it's all ambiguous. So that's what VUCA triggers, and this is what we need to learn to handle. In our leadership trainings in the past, our international groups, we've been beginning discussing this topic. And in fact, we came to the conclusion that you need to stay aware, you need to stay clear with your vision, and you need to stay connected with the people around you, with your stakeholders, even with conflict parties, because you need to uphold and build trust or rebuild trust where it went away. And it's so easy to live in our bubble and blame the other side when things go wrong. And that's what's happening. There is more disruption, more unforeseeable error and mistake. And we need to be able and learn from that together. So we need to stay connected. In another part in this training here, we will talk about our professional personality, which will give us a better understanding of what is my vision, what are my dreams, aspiration level, what are my talents and values. But that's in the other video. So let's focus on the VUCA part and not becoming defensive, which is easier said than done. That's why I'm working with you on that here in the training. To start with, embracing vulnerability is like we want to be the less fearful, the fearless leader. And but the problem actually is not the fear. The greatest barrier to courageous leadership comes from how we react to fear. And from our childhood patterns from early on in our lives, we're learning to handle fear and shame in a certain way that is sometimes less than helpful, especially when it is subconscious. And to see the things that you can't see, to learn to see it, that's actually the part that we're talking about here. So with this knowledge about my own defensive patterns, I can manage myself much better. It takes courage to accept my vulnerability, which means, yes, there are situations where I can take damage, where I can be hurt, where I can be vulnerable. And in order to embrace that, we need to have the courage to know and look into our own armor, into the behaviors, defensive behaviors that I have. And confronting my self-doubt is a good starting point. Vulnerability and managing it doesn't mean that you will perform better automatically, but it gives you a much better chance of staying effective and manage well. Because without managing your vulnerability or being embracing it, you don't have a chance. Talking about the positive function of these two feelings, fear and embarrassment. In our society, we rarely talk about it. They're kind of taboo, but they have their positive function. When we look at fear, it protects our well-being. It protects us from pain and loss. And embarrassment and shame actually has the positive effect of reminding me of my own values that I want to hold high when I'm dealing with my social environment. So if I'm making mistakes and I should feel shame about it, in a positive way, it reminds me that think about whether you want to do this again. It's a kind of feedback that helps me consciously control my own social behavior. So that's the positive part. And can we talk about it? I would say yes, we must. We've talked already about the leader, the self-aware, the differentiated personality is aware, curious, descriptive, and appreciative. And if we want to stay connected with another person, especially in disruptive situations, we need to be able and describe our positive and negative emotions in an adequate and appreciative way. We need to be able and share them, and we can only share them when we're aware of them. And we can only stay appreciative of it if we don't blame another person for it, but own it ourselves and work with it rather than against it. So if we let these defensive, my armor, or these defensive behaviors take over, which normally happens because it's an intuitive subconscious reaction, then it easily creates misunderstanding and disconnection. One example, if I'm shaming back somebody else, the reaction would be another form of defensiveness. So we're communicating less and less functional with each other. So yes, I would say it's possible and necessary.